The millionaire CEO thought he'd left her behind, until he saw her holding a little boy with his eyes. Andrew Carter could still remember every detail of the day he decided to walk away from Rachel. The memory had never really left him, no matter how many times he told himself it had been the right thing to do. He remembered the way the late afternoon light had slanted across her small apartment, turning the faded curtains into panels of dusty gold. He had stood there in a suit that cost more than her monthly rent, feeling like he was doing something necessary, something almost noble in its harshness. He told himself she had never loved him for who he was, only for what he could give her. He convinced himself that every gift, every shared moment, had been part of a transaction he had never agreed to. When he said the words, when he told her that she would get nothing more from him, not the money, not the gifts, not even a polite goodbye, she didn't cry. She had only looked at him with that calm, level gaze that had always unsettled him far more than any accusation could have. He realized, even then, that part of him had been hoping she would beg, because if she did, he could feel justified in his anger. But she hadn't. She had simply lifted her chin and asked in a voice that didn't shake whether he was sure. He remembered the quiet finality of her question, how it landed in the space between them like the closing of a door that would never open again. He had nodded because he believed it was the only way to protect himself. He had spent too many years believing that love was a weakness he couldn't afford. When he left, he didn't look back. He made it as far as the elevator before something cold settled in his chest, but even then, he ignored it. By the time he reached the street, he had already started rehearsing the version of the story he would tell himself later, that she had used him, that he had no reason to feel guilty. He told that story so many times that eventually he almost believed it. He didn't think about how small she had looked sitting on the edge of her sofa or how carefully she had folded her hands in her lap so he wouldn't see them tremble. He buried those images under meetings and acquisitions, under headlines praising his discipline and focus. If anyone asked about her, he simply said they had parted ways because it hadn't been right. No one ever pressed further. But late at night, when the world was quiet and there was nothing left to distract him, he sometimes found himself thinking about the way she had watched him as he walked out the door. Not with anger. Not even with disappointment. Just a tired, unflinching sadness that seemed to echo long after he was gone. And in those moments, when he lay awake in the dark, he wondered if he had walked away from the only thing in his life that had ever been real. In the 3 years that followed, Andrew built a life so structured that no unpredictable feeling could break through it. He doubled the size of his holdings, launched 2 new companies, and bought a penthouse overlooking the river where the city lights glittered all night. He traveled constantly, never spending more than a few weeks in one place, because motion felt safer than stillness. If he stayed still too long, he risked remembering the look in Rachel's eyes when he left her with nothing. He learned to occupy every moment with something productive, a meeting or a negotiation or a carefully managed dinner with investors. When he was alone in a hotel room, he would open his laptop and check earnings reports until his vision blurred. Anything to keep the memory at bay. At first, he expected her to call. He thought there would be messages, perhaps some attempt to reclaim what he had taken, or at least to ask why. But the weeks passed in silence, and her absence grew heavier than any accusation. That silence was the one thing he had never prepared for. He would have known how to respond to anger, even to pleading. But she had simply disappeared from his life, and in some twisted way, it made him angrier than if she had fought. He convinced himself that proved he had been right, that she had never cared. When he heard from mutual acquaintances that she had moved to a smaller neighborhood across town, he told himself he didn't care where she went. He told himself it didn't matter. But some nights, when his reflection in the dark window looked older than he remembered, he caught himself wondering whether she was all right. Whether she had someone to help her. Whether she ever thought of him. He would stand there, hands in his pockets, watching the city below and feeling a hollow ache he never admitted out loud. In meetings, he was the same man he had always been, sharp, focused, unbending. No one ever saw the part of him that lay awake at 3 in the morning, replaying that final conversation word for word. People often told him how enviable his life was. The power, the influence, the ease with which he could have whatever he wanted. They said it as though it were obvious that he had one. He never corrected them. He let them believe he had no regrets. He almost convinced himself it was true. But in the quiet hours before dawn, he knew that every success he added to his empire was just another layer over something broken. He wondered how long he would be able to pretend he didn't feel it. He wondered if there would ever be a day when he could finally let go of the question he had never dared to ask: what if he had been wrong? The morning everything began to change started like any other. Andrew was on his way to a board meeting across town, reviewing projections on his tablet while his driver wove through traffic. He had barely slept the night before, but he told himself he functioned best on discipline alone, that rest was an indulgence for people who couldn't bear to keep moving. The car slowed near a small cafe he barely noticed most days, a corner storefront with cracked window frames and faded awnings. He hadn't planned to stop, but something made him glance up from his screen. Maybe it was instinct or habit, or maybe it was the same part of him that never really let go of the past, no matter how hard he tried. He told the driver to pull over and wait. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold morning air bit through his overcoat, making him feel abruptly, uncomfortably awake. He stood there for a moment, trying to understand why his chest felt tight. When he turned toward the cafe window, he saw her. Rachel was sitting on the bench outside with her head bent slightly, her hair pulled back in a loose knot that didn't quite hide how tired she looked. But it wasn't just her presence that made him forget how to breathe. Next to her sat a little boy, no more than 3, his small hands gripping the edge of the bench as he swung his feet back and forth. The boy lifted his face at the sound of Andrew's steps, and the force of recognition hit him so hard he actually swayed. The child had his eyes. The same clear blue, impossible to mistake. The boy tilted his head curiously, blinking up at him with an expression Andrew had seen in the mirror every day of his life. For an instant, the world narrowed to that single point of connection, as though nothing else around them existed. He felt his heart slam against his ribs, a cold shock of certainty that drowned every rational explanation. Rachel looked up then, as if she had sensed him before she truly saw him. Their eyes met, and time did something strange, folding in on itself so he felt like he was standing again in that small apartment 3 years ago, about to say the words he would regret for the rest of his life. But this time, there was no anger or accusation in her face. Just a tired weariness and something else, something that looked too much like resignation. She shifted slightly, as though to shield the boy with her body, and Andrew felt a hollow shame settle under his skin. He took a step closer before he could decide if it was wise. His voice sounded rough when he spoke, and he hated that he couldn't make it steady. Rachel. The name tasted unfamiliar, though he had thought it 1,000 times in the dark. She didn't respond immediately. She just watched him with that same unreadable expression. He tried again, feeling the words scrape out of him. Is he mine? For a long moment she didn't answer. The boy looked from one of them to the other, his gaze bright with a curiosity he was too young to hide. Finally, Rachel nodded. Her hand came to rest gently on the child's back, her fingers curling in the fabric of his jacket. His name is Liam, she said. Her voice was low and calm in a way that made it worse, because he knew she had rehearsed this moment in her mind over and over. He's your son. Andrew swallowed, but it did nothing to clear the tightness in his throat. He tried to find something to say, some question that would make this moment feel less surreal, but all he could think was that he had missed everything, his first steps, his first words, the way he must have smiled when he recognized the person he loved most. He looked down at Liam, at the small hands and the familiar eyes, and felt something inside him break in two. Rachel shifted again, adjusting her hold on the boy's shoulder. You don't have to pretend, she said, softer now. I didn't ask you for anything. I'm not asking you now. But he shook his head, because the idea that she thought he might walk away again felt unbearable. I'm not pretending, he managed. He looked back at the child who was his, who had never known him, and he felt the first raw edges of a regret so complete it almost took his breath away. "I didn't know," he whispered, though he knew it didn't matter. He hadn't been there to find out. Rachel looked down at Liam, smoothing his hair with a tenderness that made Andrew's chest ache. She didn't say another word. She didn't have to. He understood in that moment that nothing in his life had ever really been about success or ambition or the need to stay in control. All of it, every decision he had made, had led him to this sidewalk, staring at the proof of what he had lost. And no amount of discipline or money or pride would ever make him whole again. He didn't know how long he stood there in front of Rachel and Liam, but it was long enough for the morning chill to seep into his bones. People moved around them on the sidewalk, some glancing curiously at the strange tableau of a suited man staring at a woman and a child with an expression too raw to hide. He had faced boardrooms full of adversaries without flinching, had negotiated contracts worth millions without losing his composure, but standing in front of them now, he felt stripped of every defense he had ever built. He tried to speak again, but his voice failed him, so he simply gestured to the empty space beside Rachel on the bench. She hesitated, her shoulders tensing, as if she was preparing herself to be disappointed again. He felt the weight of that unspoken fear settle heavily between them, a silent record of every choice he had made to prove he didn't care. When she finally nodded, he sat down slowly, careful to leave a respectful distance between them. Up close, he could see how tired she looked, the faint hollows under her eyes and the delicate lines that hadn't been there the last time he had seen her. But she was still beautiful, in a way that made something twist painfully in his chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Liam shifted restlessly, turning to bury his face against Rachel's arm. She smoothed the hand over his hair and glanced at Andrew without meeting his eyes. He didn't know how to begin. Every phrase he rehearsed sounded either too formal or too shallow, as though words alone could somehow bridge the distance of 3 years and all the damage he had caused. In the end, the only thing he could manage was the truth, as bare as it felt to say it. "I didn't know he existed," he said quietly. "If I had known," he stopped because he wasn't sure what he would have done. He wanted to believe he would have come back, that he wouldn't have let pride decide everything, but he couldn't be certain. That uncertainty felt like its own kind of shame. Rachel's eyes flicked up to meet his, and for the first time he saw something flicker there, a fragile echo of the woman who used to believe he could be more than he was. But her voice was calm when she answered. "I know you didn't know. But you also never asked." She looked back down at Liam, her fingers tracing a little circle on the boy's shoulder. "You made it very clear you didn't want anything from me." He winced, because it was true. He had built that wall between them, brick by careful brick, convinced he was protecting himself. All he had really done was protect his fear. The fear of being needed, of failing someone who depended on him, of not being enough. Liam shifted again, peeking up at him with solemn blue eyes that made Andrew feel like he was being seen for exactly what he was. Not a success. Not a figure of power. Just a man who had run away from the one thing that could have made his life real. He forced himself to meet that gaze, even though it felt like the hardest thing he had ever done. He turned back to Rachel and found that his hands were trembling slightly in his lap. He folded them together so she wouldn't see. "I'm not here to demand anything," he said finally. I'd like to know him. If you'll let me." The silence that followed felt longer than any boardroom negotiation he had ever endured. Rachel's eyes searched his face, as if she was looking for the first sign that he would break his word again. He didn't blame her. He had given her every reason to doubt him. But eventually she looked back down at Liam and smoothed his hair again. Her shoulders relaxed by a fraction, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "I don't know what that will look like," she said. "I can't promise anything." "I understand," he whispered, because he did. He didn't deserve promises. He didn't deserve her trust. But maybe, if he was careful, if he showed up every day and proved he could be more than the man he had been, he could earn the smallest place in this child's life. They sat there a little longer, the three of them in a hesitant, uneasy circle, while the rest of the city moved on as if nothing monumental had happened. To anyone passing by, it probably looked like a family out for coffee on a cold morning. To him, it felt like the first fragile moment of something that might one day heal the empty space he had carried inside him for years. Andrew didn't know what he expected when he finally stood and asked if he could walk them home. Maybe he thought Rachel would say no and gather Liam in her arms and disappear back into the quiet, hidden life she had built without him. But she surprised him by hesitating only a moment before she nodded. Her agreement felt fragile, as though any wrong word might shatter it, and he treated the moment like something precious he didn't dare mishandle. They walked slowly down the block, past shops he had never noticed, because he had never needed to look. The morning traffic hummed around them, but all he could hear was the small, steady sound of Liam's feet as he shuffled along beside his mother, clutching her hand with one small fist. Every few steps, Liam glanced up at him with wide blue eyes, studying him as though trying to puzzle out what role this stranger played in his quiet world. Andrew wished he had the right to take his hand, to lift him up the way he had seen other fathers do, but he knew he hadn't earned that yet. So he kept his distance, matching their pace without imposing. Occasionally he asked Liam a question, how old he was, whether he liked the park down the street, and though the boy never answered, he watched Andrew with cautious curiosity, and somehow that felt like a beginning. Rachel remained silent through most of the walk, her posture straight and her chin lifted, as though she needed every ounce of composure just to share the sidewalk with him. Once, when Liam tugged her sleeve to ask for a snack, she knelt to rummage through her bag, and Andrew saw the fraying seam near the zipper, the faint wear in the knees of her jeans. The sight made his throat tighten with guilt he couldn't disguise. He thought of all the nights he had spent in hotels that cost more for a week than she likely earned in months. All the time he had pretended she didn't exist so he wouldn't have to face what he had done. When they reached the small brick building where she lived, she paused in front of the door, turning to face him. For a moment, she looked like she might tell him to leave after all, that it was too late for him to try to be part of any of this. He felt his pulse thud against his ribs as he waited for her judgment. But instead, she rested her hand lightly on Liam's shoulder and spoke without looking at him. I don't want to confuse him, she said quietly. I don't know what you want from this, or from us. He swallowed, wishing he could find words that sounded more certain than he felt. I don't expect anything from you, he said carefully. I don't even expect you to forgive me. But I do want to know him. And if you'll allow it, I'd like to help. She lifted her gaze to meet his then, and he knew she saw how raw he was, how much he meant it. For the first time since he'd arrived that morning, some of the tightness in her expression eased. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. We'll see, she said, her voice soft but firm. For now, you can call. If you really mean to stay involved, he'll figure it out. He nodded too because anything more would have felt like asking for more than he deserved. He forced himself to step back as she turned to unlock the door. Liam glanced over his shoulder at him one last time, his small face serious in a way that made Andrew's heart feel too big for his chest. Then they disappeared into the building, and he was left alone on the sidewalk, feeling like the ground had shifted under his feet. He stood there for a long time, long after the door had closed, trying to absorb what had just happened. He had spent years telling himself he was strong because he didn't need anyone. But as he stood in front of that modest building, he realized he had never felt weaker or more afraid, because for the first time in his life, he wanted something he couldn't control. He wanted to be worthy of a place in that child's life. And he knew that if Rachel gave him even the smallest chance, he would spend the rest of his days proving he deserved it. The first time Andrew called, it took him almost an hour to work up the nerve. He had never felt so absurdly unsure of himself, not in any business negotiation, not even in the early days when he was building his first company from nothing. His hand hovered over his phone until he forced himself to dial the number Rachel had given him. Each ring sounded impossibly loud in his ear. When she finally picked up, he realized he had been holding his breath. Her voice was cautious but not cold, the quiet tone of someone who had learned to expect very little. He asked if it would be all right to see Liam again. She was silent for so long that he thought she might say no. Then, with a small sigh, she told him they would be in the park near their apartment around 11 the next morning. She didn't offer more than that, and he didn't ask. When he arrived the next day, he saw them before they saw him. Rachel was sitting on a bench near the playground, her hair pulled back in a loose knot. Liam was crouched beside a patch of grass, completely absorbed in picking up tiny stones and arranging them in a line. Andrew stood for a moment, studying the scene with a pang of longing so sharp it almost unbalanced him. He tried to imagine what it must have been like for Rachel to spend 3 years raising him alone. Every scraped knee and late-night fever. Every birthday he hadn't been there to celebrate. He wondered whether she had ever wished he would appear. Whether Liam had ever asked why he didn't have a father. When she finally looked up and saw him, she didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. She lifted her hand in a brief, almost tentative wave. It was an invitation, but one that carried the weight of all the things she couldn't yet say. He walked across the grass feeling absurdly formal in his suit, painfully aware of how out of place he must look. When he stopped in front of them, Liam looked up from his stones. His small face was curious and wary all at once. Andrew crouched down so he wouldn't tower over him. "Hi, Liam," he said quietly. "Do you remember me?" Liam didn't answer. He just watched him in that solemn, searching way that made Andrew feel transparent. Rachel spoke softly, her voice pitched so Liam could hear but not feel pressured. "This is Andrew," she said. "He knew you when you were very little." The boy glanced at her, as though checking to see if she approved of this stranger. Then, with the small, decisive movements of a child who didn't overthink, he picked up one of the stones and held it out. Andrew took it carefully, feeling something in his chest loosen when Liam didn't pull his hand back right away. It was such a small gesture, but it felt enormous. For the next hour, they sat together in the grass while Liam showed him every little rock he had collected. Andrew listened to Rachel's quiet observations about which playground equipment Liam liked best, how he sometimes got shy around other kids, how he always wanted to take home something he found outside. He knew she was giving him these details because she understood he needed them. He also knew that sharing them cost her something, that she was trusting him a fraction more than she had the day before. When it was time to leave, Rachel rose and brushed grass from her jeans. Liam took her hand automatically. Andrew stood too, feeling like there were 1,000 things he wanted to say. He wanted to tell her he was sorry again. He wanted to promise he wouldn't fail them this time. But the words felt too big and too inadequate all at once. So instead, he simply said, "Thank you. For letting me come." Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was something like understanding there. "He'll need time," she said, her voice low. "I will too." "I know," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." As they walked away, Liam looked back over his shoulder. It was only a moment, but it felt like the smallest, most important step. When they disappeared around the corner, Andrew stood in the empty park feeling like something he had thought was permanently broken had shifted. Not healed, not yet. But no longer beyond repair. Over the next weeks, Andrew made visiting Liam part of his life in a way that felt more real than anything he had done in years. He adjusted his schedule so he could spend a few hours in the afternoons meeting them at the park or walking with them through the neighborhood. The first few times, he felt like an intruder. He tried to stay on the edges, careful not to overwhelm Liam or assume he had any right to step into the role of father just because biology said he could. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the rhythm of these visits began to change. Liam started to greet him with a shy wave instead of hiding behind Rachel's leg. He began to hold out a small hand for Andrew to take when they crossed the street, and each time Andrew felt that small warm weight, something settled in his chest that he hadn't even realized was missing. He began to learn Liam's little habits. How he liked to collect leaves and pretend they were treasure. How he always counted the dogs they passed on their walks. How he grew quiet and thoughtful right before he became tired, as if he were gathering the courage to admit he needed rest. Andrew treasured every detail. He kept them in his mind like precious evidence that this time he was showing up, that he was learning who his son was instead of imagining it from a distance. Rachel watched these changes with a kind of wary calm. She never discouraged Liam from reaching for Andrew's hand, but she never prompted him to do it either. She seemed determined that whatever bond grew between them would be real, not forced. He respected her for that, even though it meant progress was slow. He also knew it was the only way it could be. She needed to see that he was consistent, that this wasn't another grand gesture he would abandon when it became inconvenient. One afternoon, they stopped at a small cafe near the park. Rachel ordered tea, and Liam sat on the bench between them with a chocolate milk that left a faint mustache above his lip. Andrew found himself smiling at the sight. It struck him that he hadn't smiled like that, unguarded and simply happy, in years. He looked over and realized Rachel had noticed. Their eyes met, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, there was no accusation there. Only quiet acknowledgement that, despite everything, they were both doing the best they could. He wanted to tell her how sorry he was, not just for leaving but for the years he had spent convincing himself he was right. But he also knew that apologies, while necessary, would never be enough. So instead he listened as she told him about Liam's preschool, about how he liked painting and was learning to write his name. He nodded and asked questions, grateful for every piece of information she was willing to share. He realized that this was what love looked like in the aftermath of so much damage. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was slow, ordinary, built moment by moment in the small spaces of daily life. As the afternoon light faded and the cafe emptied, Liam began to grow drowsy, his head tipping against Rachel's arm. She shifted to lift him into her lap, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. The tenderness in her expression made something ache behind Andrew's ribs. He wondered how many nights she had sat exactly like this, steady and alone. He thought about how strong she had had to be, not because she wanted to but because there had been no other choice. Before they left, he offered to walk them home. Rachel hesitated, then nodded, and he felt a quiet swell of relief. They walked slowly down the block, Liam heavy with sleep on her shoulder. When they reached her building, she paused on the steps and turned to face him. For the first time, she looked almost unsure. "Do you want to carry him?" she asked. Her voice was so soft he nearly thought he had imagined it. He nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She shifted Liam gently into his arms, and the weight of his son against his chest was the most humbling thing he had ever felt. Liam stirred, his small hand catching in the fabric of Andrew's jacket. For a moment, Andrew closed his eyes and just let himself feel it. The warmth. The trust. The impossible relief of finally being here. When he opened his eyes, Rachel was watching him. She didn't say anything, but she didn't look away. He thought she understood without needing him to explain that this was the first time he felt like he belonged anywhere. And as he carried Liam up the steps, he knew that no matter how long it took, he would keep coming back until he had proven that he wasn't going to leave again. The morning Rachel finally invited him inside felt almost unreal. It was a Saturday, gray and damp with the threat of rain, and he arrived early because he couldn't bear the thought of being even a minute late. He stood outside her building with a small bag of books and a stuffed bear Liam had pointed to in a shop window the week before. For a moment he hesitated on the steps, feeling the weight of everything this small moment represented. He had spent years convincing himself he didn't need anyone, that distance and self-reliance were strengths, but as he stood there with his heart hammering, he knew this was the bravest thing he had ever done. When she opened the door, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep, but there was no hesitation in her voice when she stepped back to let him cross the threshold. It felt like crossing into a different life, one he didn't yet understand but wanted more than anything to be worthy of. The apartment was small and worn around the edges, with a few toys stacked neatly in bins along the wall and a row of children's books lined up on a low shelf. It smelled faintly of lavender and the warm sweetness of something baking, and he felt an ache he couldn't name as he imagined how many mornings she must have spent here alone, finding ways to make this space feel safe for their son. Liam was sitting cross-legged on the rug, surrounded by colored pencils. He looked up when Andrew stepped into the room and broke into a small, shy smile that made Andrew's throat tighten. He crouched down and held out the bear. Liam's eyes widened as he took it, his fingers brushing Andrew's hand with a soft, tentative trust that made him feel humbled to his bones. Rachel watched from the kitchen doorway. She didn't interrupt or comment, and he was grateful for her silence because he needed this moment to find its own shape. He sat on the floor beside Liam while the boy turned the bear over in his hands and eventually tucked it into the crook of his arm. They spent the next hour with Liam showing him every drawing, explaining in a quiet, serious voice what each picture meant. Andrew listened as though every word was the most important thing he had ever heard because, in a way he could never have explained before, it was. After a while, Rachel brought them mugs of tea and a plate of warm muffins. The three of them sat together in a circle on the rug, and it struck him that this was the first time he had ever shared something so ordinary and so profound. He remembered how he used to think intimacy meant grand gestures and expensive gifts, but now he saw it for what it really was, small, quiet rituals that made a life feel shared. Liam leaned against his side, growing drowsy, and Rachel rested her hand lightly on her son's back. Their fingers brushed for an instant, and neither of them moved away. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't even trust. But it was a beginning. A fragile agreement that maybe, if he was patient and steady and willing to earn every inch of progress, there could be something whole on the other side of all this regret. As the rain began to tap softly against the windows, he looked around the little room and felt something loosen in his chest. For so long he had believed that power meant never needing anyone, never letting them see where he was afraid. But sitting there on the rug with Liam curled against him and Rachel watching with her guarded, hopeful eyes, he realized that he had never known real strength until he chose to stay. When it was time to leave, Liam stirred and wrapped his arms around Andrew's neck in a clumsy hug that nearly unraveled him. He held on as gently as he could, closing his eyes against the hot sting of tears he didn't want to embarrass the boy by shedding. When he finally stood and handed Liam back to Rachel, her eyes met his, and for the first time, he thought he saw something that looked like possibility. He didn't ask if he could come again because he didn't want to make her feel pressured. But as he turned to go, she surprised him by speaking quietly. "You can come tomorrow if you'd like." He nodded, unable to find words that felt big enough for what that meant. As he stepped back out into the soft drizzle, he felt as if he were carrying something precious in his chest. He knew there were still countless mistakes to mend, years he could never reclaim, and fears that would surface again and again. But he also knew that for the first time, he wouldn't run. He would be there, every day, proving that he was no longer the man who walked away. And for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. I think this ending is powerful exactly because it doesn't try to pretend that love fixes everything overnight. Instead, it shows how true redemption happens in small, repeated choices, showing up, listening without defensiveness, taking responsibility without expecting immediate forgiveness. What moved me most is how Andrew's transformation isn't about grand declarations but about simple, consistent presence. He finally understands that trust is built in quiet, ordinary moments, sitting on the floor coloring, carrying a sleepy child, respecting boundaries he once ignored. That's a humbling realization for someone who spent his life believing success was measured by control and status. I appreciate that the story leaves space for uncertainty. Rachel doesn't instantly forgive him, and she shouldn't. The ending honors her strength and Liam's need for stability while still allowing hope to grow in a believable way. For me, the most beautiful part is that Andrew stops trying to prove he's right or worthy and instead commits to simply being there, without guarantees. That is what makes this ending feel real and uplifting. It's not a neat resolution but the first genuine step toward healing, which is so much more meaningful than any fairy tale reconciliation.
Callista Carter once believed that love could conquer all. When she married Louis Prescott, a highly successful and admired businessman, she thought she was stepping into a fairy tale romance. But 2 years later, she realized just how wrong she had been. Louis was not the husband she had dreamed of. He had never touched her, never looked at her with the eyes of a man in love. Day by day, she found herself trapped in a cold, lifeless marriage, where love existed only in name. From the outside, they seemed like the perfect couple, a powerful businessman with an empire at his feet and a sophisticated, accomplished woman thriving in the publishing industry. But behind the doors of their luxurious New York penthouse, Callista was nothing more than a wife on paper, a forgotten shadow in her own life. She had tried everything to reach Louis, to make him love her, but every effort was met with silence. His indifference was not temporary, it was a deliberate choice. And then, one night, when Louis carelessly left his phone on the kitchen counter, Callista stumbled upon a truth she was never prepared to face. A truth that would shatter the last fragile hope she had been holding on to. This marriage was not just cold, it was a lie. And now she had to face the reality that perhaps Louis had never loved her at all. Callista couldn't remember the last time Louis touched her. No embrace, no kiss, no whispered words of love. They shared a home, but not a life. Every night, she lay alone in their vast bed, listening to the ticking of the clock, a cruel reminder of the loneliness that consumed her. Meanwhile, Louis returned late, the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his shirt, sometimes not coming home at all. She had once believed it was her fault. She had tried everything, changing herself, becoming the perfect wife, waiting for him, hoping he would see her. But Louis never cared. Then, one fateful night, he made a mistake. The man who was always so careful with his phone left it on the kitchen counter. Callista was not one to invade someone's privacy. But when the screen lit up, revealing a message that no wife should ever have to read, something inside her cracked. "Last night was incredible. I can still feel you on me. When can I see you again?" Her heart stopped cold. With trembling hands, she unlocked the phone, only to be met with an avalanche of similar messages from women she didn't know, words of love and passion that were never meant for her. Everything fell into place. The late nights, the lies about endless meetings, the distant, emotionless glances when she tried to reach for him. Louis hadn't just betrayed her. He had stolen 2 years of her life, making her believe in something that was never real. Fury and heartbreak waged war inside her as Louis walked into the kitchen, looking at her with mild curiosity, as if her world hadn't just crumbled to dust. "How could you do this to me?" Her voice trembled, not just with pain, but with a strength she had never known before. Louis merely raised a brow, then smirked. "Do what?" Callista threw the phone at him. "Don't play dumb, I saw everything." Louis glanced at the screen and then shrugged. No guilt, no remorse. "Did you really think I married you for love?" His laugh was mocking, cold. The world tilted beneath her feet. "Then why?" she whispered, fists clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. Louis sighed as if this conversation bored him. "My father wanted it, a polished wife made for good press, and you were easy, compliant, no drama." The words cut deeper than any blade ever could. She was never his love, only his convenience. But this time, the pain did not turn to tears. It turned to clarity, to rage, to a decision. That night, Callista packed her bags and walked away from that penthouse. Louis didn't stop her. No apologies, no regrets. And as the door shut behind her, she knew she was never coming back. Callista walked away from her marriage with Louis, but she had no idea where to go or what to do next. The apartment she rented was much smaller than the luxurious penthouse she once shared with Louis, but at least it was hers. Everything inside it was chosen by her, from the soft pastel curtains to the bookshelves filled with novels she loved. And yet, despite her newfound freedom, she felt empty. Every night, as silence filled her new home, Callista wondered, had she made a mistake leaving? Was this loneliness any better than the cold indifference she had endured? Those questions haunted her until he appeared. Sebastian Hale. The first time Callista met Sebastian was at a publishing gala where he had commanded the entire room with his confidence and authority. As the CEO of Hale Media Group, Sebastian was admired and feared, a man of intellect, precision, and undeniable power. But what most people didn't know was that Sebastian had been watching her for years. He had noticed her 2 years ago, before she married Louis. He had wanted to approach her, to speak to her, but when he saw the unwavering hope in her eyes as she looked at Louis, he had forced himself to walk away. Sebastian was not a man who took what wasn't his. But now, everything had changed. When news of her divorce spread, Sebastian knew his time had come. They ran into each other for the first time in years at a quiet cafe in the heart of the city. Callista sat by the window, absent-mindedly stirring her coffee, lost in thoughts that led nowhere. She barely noticed the shadow that fell over her table. Until she looked up. Sebastian Hale stood before her. "I heard about the divorce." His voice was deep, steady, yet laced with something restrained. Callista blinked. They had never been close, but the way he looked at her now felt anything but distant. "News travels fast," she murmured, forcing a small, detached smile. But Sebastian wasn't here for empty words. He studied her for a long moment before speaking again, and his next words completely shattered her composure. "Work for me?" Callista froze. "What?" Sebastian leaned back, his gaze sharp yet unreadable. "You need a job. I need someone I can trust. It makes sense, doesn't it?" She hesitated. Yes, she needed work, but why him? Why now? "I don't need saving," she said carefully, watching him closely. Sebastian smirked, but it wasn't amusement. It was something far more dangerous. "Maybe not," he murmured, his voice dropping just enough to send a shiver through her. "But you need someone who actually sees you." And in that moment, something shifted inside her. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as broken as she thought. Working under Sebastian Hale was unlike anything Callista had ever experienced before. Sebastian wasn't just a powerful CEO, he was a force of nature, a man who commanded every room he stepped into. He exuded absolute control, but with her, that control seemed to crack a little more each day. At first, Callista tried to keep her distance. While Sebastian had given her a new path, she couldn't ignore the silent tension between them. Every time he passed by, she felt his eyes on her, heavy, searing, filled with an unspoken hunger. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but soon, it became undeniable. It was in the way they stood too close, in the way he always found an excuse to keep her working late, in the way his jaw clenched every time another man dared to speak to her. Sebastian was a man of control, but with her, that control was unraveling. And then, on a late night, the game ended. Callista was still at the office, focused on finalizing a report, when she felt him behind her. She didn't turn, but she could feel the weight of his gaze on her skin. "If I were your husband, I would have never left you alone." The words made her heart stutter. Slowly, Callista turned to face him, pulse racing. Sebastian leaned against her desk, his gaze dark, intense, filled with a desire he could no longer suppress. "Sebastian," she started, but before she could finish, he pushed off the desk, taking slow, deliberate steps toward her, forcing her to look up at him. "Say my name again, Callista." His voice was low, husky, a dangerous whisper. She forgot how to breathe. She should have stepped back, should have kept her distance, but she couldn't. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a declaration, a release, a vow that he wasn't holding back anymore. His hands framed her face, pulling her deeper, making sure she felt every ounce of the hunger he had been restraining. Callista should have pushed him away. She should have fought it. But instead, she kissed him back with everything she had. Because for the first time in her life, she felt truly wanted. And Sebastian Hale was not a man who would let her run away again. From that moment on, Sebastian didn't let Callista run anymore. The air between them shifted. No more stolen glances, no more hesitant touches. Everything was clear now. This was no longer a game but a declaration. Sebastian wanted her, and Callista couldn't deny that she wanted him too. Everything came to a head at the company's gala. Callista wore a sleek black dress, her beauty commanding attention from everyone in the room. But no one looked at her the way Sebastian did, his gaze sharp, possessive, as if she had always been his. Then, Louis arrived. He smirked as he approached, eyes gleaming with mockery. "You moved on quickly, Callista. Barely divorced and already with another man?" Callista tightened her grip on her wine glass, humiliation simmering in her veins. But before she could respond, Sebastian stepped between them. His presence was unshakable, commanding. "She's none of your concern anymore, Prescott." His voice was cold steel. Louis chuckled darkly. "You know, Sebastian, she was still a virgin when I left her." Callista froze. But Sebastian only smiled. The smile of a man who had already won. His strong arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him, and in front of Louis, he kissed her. Not a soft kiss, but a claim, a warning, a promise. When he finally pulled away, his gaze never wavered from Louis. "That just means she was always meant to be mine." Louis had nothing left to say. He turned and walked away, but the taste of defeat would never leave him. And as the door closed behind him, Sebastian turned to Callista, his eyes no longer cold, but burning with unspoken desire. "You're mine, Callista," he whispered. "You always have been." And this time, she didn't want to run anymore. Sebastian never let her go again. After that night, there was no distance left between them. He kissed her like she was the most precious thing he had ever held, touched her with tenderness yet unwavering possession. Callista had never been loved this way, with passion, devotion, and an intensity that consumed her whole. And then, one day, Sebastian took her breath away completely. He brought her to a secluded beachside villa, where the waves crashed gently against the shore, and the sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson. They sat on the balcony, glasses of red wine in hand, the ocean breeze tangling through her hair. Callista gazed out at the water, lost in thought, until she felt his eyes on her. She turned, and her heart stopped. Sebastian was kneeling before her, a stunning ring held between his strong fingers. "Marry me, Callista, not because it's the next step, not because it's expected, but because you know, deep down, that you belong with me, that you were always meant to be mine." Her breath hitched. "Sebastian..." But he didn't let her hesitate. His hand tightened around hers, his gaze holding everything she needed to know. "I don't want just a part of you." His voice was deep, steady, yet almost urgent. "I want it all. I want to wake up to you every morning, to be in every dream you have. I want forever, Callista." Tears welled in her eyes. She had once believed in love, had once been broken by it, but this time she knew this wasn't just another beautiful illusion. Because Sebastian didn't just love her, he worshipped her. Callista smiled through her tears, squeezing his hand. Yes, and as Sebastian slid the ring onto her finger, as he pulled her into a kiss beneath the golden light of the setting sun, Callista knew this was the best decision she had ever made. Callista's wedding day was nothing like the last one. This time, she wasn't a bride filled with doubt, trying to be enough for a man who never truly saw her. This time, she knew she was loved. The white gown hugged her figure perfectly, intricate lace details woven into every inch like it had been made just for her. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a different woman, one who was cherished, worshipped, and stepping into a marriage not out of obligation, but out of destiny. The grand doors swung open, and at the end of the aisle, Sebastian Hale stood waiting for her. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, tall and commanding, but his eyes held only one thing: her. Callista's heart pounded against her ribs as she took slow, steady steps toward him. Everything else disappeared. It was just her and the man who looked at her like she was his entire world. When she placed her hand in his, she felt warmth, protection, and the deep, unwavering love he held for her. His voice was steady, yet thick with emotion as he vowed, "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were meant to be mine. And today, in front of the world, I vow to love you, cherish you, and protect you, not just for this lifetime, but for every lifetime to come." Those words weren't just vows. They were a promise etched into his soul. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Sebastian didn't wait a second longer. He pulled her into a kiss, deep and possessive, a kiss that wasn't just love, but a declaration to the world that she was his, forever. And when he whispered against her lips, his voice rough with emotion, "I've waited for this moment for so long, Callista, and I will never let you go." She smiled, squeezing his hand, knowing this was the beginning of forever. 3 years later, Callista never thought happiness could feel this complete. She woke up to the soft glow of morning sunlight filtering through sheer white curtains. Beside her, Sebastian was still asleep, one arm draped over her waist as if even in his dreams, he couldn't bear to let her go. She smiled, but before she could fully enjoy the quiet moment, a burst of laughter echoed from outside the door. "Mommy, Daddy." The bedroom door flew open, and their two little angels, Leo and Leanna, came running in, their brown curls tousled from sleep, bright eyes gleaming with excitement. Sebastian groaned, burying his face in the pillow. "No way! It's too early!" Callista chuckled, but before she could respond, Leo leapt onto the bed, while Liana climbed onto Sebastian. "Wake up, Daddy! You promised to take us out today," Liana reminded him, her tiny hands trying to tug the blanket away. Sebastian sighed, but the soft smile tugging at his lips betrayed him. He pulled both kids into his arms, pressing a kiss to their foreheads, before looking over at the woman he loved most in the world. "I guess my sleep is officially over," he smirked, his gaze filled with warmth. Callista laughed, resting her head against his shoulder as their children giggled between them. This happiness she knew would last forever. Clara sat quietly under the dim light of a flickering street lamp. The cold wind whipped through her thin coat as she hugged herself tightly, trying to keep warm. Her once vibrant eyes were now hollow, as if the very essence of her soul had been drained, leaving behind only the weight of a mother's unspeakable loss. Life had been unkind to her. Once, Clara was a beloved school teacher, known for her kind heart and patience. But tragedy struck when her only daughter, Sophia, fell gravely ill. Despite her best efforts and countless sleepless nights caring for Sophia, Clara couldn't save her. The loss shattered her world, leaving her not only grief-stricken but also financially ruined from the overwhelming medical bills. Homeless and heartbroken, Clara wandered from shelter to shelter, carrying nothing but Sophia's worn-out diary, a cherished reminder of the bright, curious girl who had once filled her life with laughter. She tried to hold on to hope, but the weight of her circumstances grew heavier each day. One fateful evening, as the rain poured mercilessly, Clara sat on a park bench, drenched and trembling. She gazed into the distance, wondering if life still held anything meaningful for her. Little did she know, That very night, a chance encounter would change her life forever. The storm raged on, thunder rumbling across the darkened sky. Clara huddled on the bench, her wet hair plastered to her face. She was too tired to care about the cold or the rain. The numbness inside her heart made the storm feel insignificant. A sleek black car suddenly pulled up near her. Its headlights cut through the rain, casting long shadows across the park. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a tall man with an umbrella. His sharp features were softened by a look of genuine concern as he approached her. "Are you all right?" the man asked, his voice calm yet commanding. Clara looked up, her body shivering too hard to respond. She shook her head, unable to find the words to explain her situation. The man crouched to her level. "You shouldn't be out here in this weather. Please, let me help you." At first, Clara hesitated. The shadows of her past made it hard to trust anyone, especially someone so polished and seemingly untouched by hardship. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw not pity, but genuine concern. With a weak nod, she allowed him to help her to her feet. The man introduced himself as Harry, a reclusive businessman who rarely ventured out in public. He didn't explain why he was there that night, only that he couldn't leave her in the rain. Clara, too exhausted to question further, let him guide her into his car. As they drove through the city, Harry's reserved demeanor softened. He asked Clara about her situation, but she gave only brief answers, ashamed of how far she had fallen. Yet Harry didn't judge her. Instead, he assured her that she was safe and offered her a warm place to stay for the night. When they arrived at Harry's sprawling mansion on the edge of the city, Clara was overwhelmed. The grandeur of the place, its towering ceilings, marble floors, and elegant furnishings, stood in stark contrast to the harsh realities she had been facing. As she barely noticed, as a young girl, no older than 10, peeked curiously around the corner. "Emily," Harry said gently, "this is Clara. She'll be staying with us for a while." Emily nodded shyly before retreating to her room, leaving Clara to wonder about the child. She didn't realize yet that Emily would soon become the center of her life. The morning light streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow across the living room. Clara sat quietly on the plush sofa, sipping a cup of tea that Harry's staff had brought her. She felt out of place in the mansion's opulence, but the kindness she had received began to chip away at her initial unease. Her thoughts were interrupted by soft footsteps. She turned to see Emily, Harry's daughter, standing hesitantly in the doorway. The girl clutched a stuffed rabbit tightly to her chest, her wide eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of nervousness. "Hi," Clara said gently, offering a small smile. Emily took a tentative step forward. "Are you staying here now?" "For a little while," Clara replied. "Your dad was kind enough to help me last night." Emily studied her for a moment before sitting on the carpet nearby. Still holding the stuffed rabbit, there was a quiet vulnerability about her that reminded Clara of Sophia. She felt an instant connection, though she didn't yet understand why. As the days passed, Clara began to notice subtle signs that something was wrong with Emily. The girl often looked pale and tired, and she would occasionally clutch her chest as if in discomfort. Clara's instincts as a mother kicked in. The symptoms mirrored those Sophia had shown during her illness, and it sent a sharp pang through her heart, as if the wounds of her past had been torn open once more. Memories of holding Sophia during her hardest nights flooded back, overwhelming her with both fear and determination. One afternoon, while Harry was in his study, Clara found Emily sitting in the garden, her breathing labored. She rushed to the child's side and knelt down. "Emily, are you okay?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. Emily nodded weakly, but winced as another wave of pain washed over her. Without thinking, Clara scooped the girl into her arms and carried her inside, calling out for help. Harry appeared almost instantly, his face pale with fear. "What's wrong?" "She needs a doctor," Clara said firmly. "Now." Harry wasted no time. Within minutes, a private physician arrived and began examining Emily. As the doctor worked, Clara stood by, her hands trembling. Memories of Sophia flooded her mind. How helpless she had felt, how desperately she had fought to save her daughter. When the examination was over, the doctor pulled Harry aside. Clara caught fragments of their conversation. Unclear diagnoses, monitor closely, and potential complications. Harry's expression darkened, and Clara's heart ached for both him and Emily. That evening, Harry confided in Clara. "Emily's been unwell for a while," he admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "I've tried everything, specialists, treatments, but nothing has worked. I don't know what else to do." Clara placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "I've seen these symptoms before," she said softly. "My daughter Sophia had something similar. I can help, if you'll let me." Harry looked at her, his guarded exterior crumbling. In that moment, he realized that Clara wasn't just a guest in his home. She was someone who could bring a sense of hope and understanding to a situation he had felt powerless to control. Over the following weeks, Clara devoted herself to Emily's care. She stayed by the girl's side, helping her through the difficult days and teaching Harry how to recognize and respond to the symptoms. Slowly but surely, Emily began to trust Clara, and the bond between them grew stronger. For Clara, Emily became more than just a child in need. She became a reminder of the love she had shared with Sophia, and a chance to channel her grief into something meaningful. Weeks turned into months, and Clara became an integral part of the household. Emily's condition had stabilized under her care, but it was clear to everyone that the young girl wasn't out of danger. Despite Harry's relentless efforts to find a solution, the doctors continued to deliver the same frustrating answer: no diagnosis, no definitive treatment. One evening, Clara sat at the dining table with Harry after Emily had gone to bed. The usually stoic man seemed more vulnerable than ever, his shoulders slumped and his face etched with worry. "I feel like I'm failing her," Harry admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "All the money, all the resources, and I still can't save my own daughter." Clara reached out and touched his hand. "You're doing everything you can, Harry, but maybe there's something more we haven't considered." The next morning, Harry received a call from a renowned specialist he had consulted months ago. The doctor had finally reviewed Emily's case in depth and identified a rare genetic condition. There was hope, but it came with a catch. Emily's condition required an organ transplant, and finding a suitable donor would be nearly impossible given her rare blood type. The odds of finding a match were slim, and time was running out. Clara listened intently as the doctor explained the situation. Something stirred deep within her, a quiet realization that both frightened and emboldened her. Without saying a word, she walked into the kitchen and pulled out her medical records, which she had kept in her bag out of habit. When the tests came back, the truth was undeniable. Clara was a perfect match. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Harry looked at her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and fear. "You're willing to do this? To risk your life for Emily?" Clara took a deep breath. "I've already lost one child, Harry. I can't stand by and lose another. Not when I can help." The days that followed were filled with quiet tension. Clara grappled with the enormity of her decision. Memories of Sophia flooded her mind. Her laughter, her strength, her last moments. She thought of Emily, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her favorite stories, the way she clung to Clara when she felt scared. One night, as Clara sat in the garden, Harry joined her. He had barely spoken since the test results had come back, struggling with the weight of the situation. "I don't know if I can let you do this," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I've already asked too much of you." Clara turned to him, her expression resolute. "You haven't asked for anything, Harry. This is my choice. Emily deserves a chance to live, to grow up, to have a future. And if I can give her that, then it's worth it." Harry's eyes glistened with unshed tears. For a man who had always been in control, this was a moment of profound vulnerability. "Thank you," he whispered. The decision was made, but the fear lingered. Clara knew the risks, knew that the procedure could cost her life, but she also knew that the love she had for Sophia, the love she now felt for Emily, was stronger than her fear. On the day of the operation, as Clara was being prepped in the hospital, Emily clung to her hand. "You're not going to leave me, are you?" the little girl asked, her voice trembling. Clara smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face. "I'm going to do everything I can to stay with you, sweetheart, I promise." As they wheeled her into the operating room, Clara closed her eyes, her heart filled with both fear and hope. Whatever happened next, she knew she was doing the right thing. The operating room buzzed with activity. Clara lay still on the table, her mind calm despite the risks she faced. She had made peace with her decision. This was her chance to save Emily, to do for the little girl what she couldn't for Sophia. Hours passed as the surgical team worked with precision. In another room, Emily lay under sedation, waiting for the organ that could save her life. Harry paced anxiously in the waiting area, his usual composed demeanor shattered by the weight of uncertainty. Finally, the lead surgeon emerged, removing his mask. "The procedure was successful," he said with a tired but reassuring smile. "Both Clara and Emily are stable." Harry exhaled, his hands trembling with relief. The operation was over, but the road to recovery was just beginning. Clara woke up 2 days later in a sunlit hospital room. Her body ached, but she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. As her eyes adjusted to the light, she saw Harry sitting by her bedside. He looked exhausted, his suit wrinkled, but his face lit up when he saw her stir. "Clara," he said softly, leaning forward. "You're awake." "How's Emily?" Clara asked, her voice weak but steady. "She's going to be okay," Harry said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to you." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as relief washed over her. "I'm so glad," she whispered. For weeks, both Clara and Emily remained under close medical supervision. Clara's recovery was slower, her body adjusting to the strain of the procedure. But Harry was always there, ensuring she had everything she needed. Emily, meanwhile, regained her strength faster than anyone had expected. One afternoon, Emily visited Clara's room, her face beaming with life. She climbed onto the chair beside the bed and held Clara's hand. "You're my hero," Emily said, her voice full of gratitude. Clara smiled, squeezing the girl's hand gently. "You're pretty brave yourself, kiddo." In an unexpected twist, Clara's recovery accelerated after Harry consulted with a team of researchers he had been funding for years. They proposed a groundbreaking experimental treatment that could aid Clara's healing process. Despite Clara's initial hesitation, Harry convinced her to give it a try. The treatment worked. Clara's body began to heal faster than the doctors anticipated, and within a few months, she was back on her feet. The medical team called it a miracle, but Clara believed it was a testament to the combined power of science and determination. One crisp autumn day, Clara stood in the garden of Harry's mansion, watching Emily chase butterflies with the energy of a child who had just been given a second chance at life. Harry joined her, his hands tucked into his pockets. "She wouldn't be here without you," he said quietly. Clara turned to him, her eyes warm. "She wouldn't be here without you either, Harry. You never gave up on her." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of everything they had endured settling into the stillness. In their hearts, they both knew this wasn't just a story of survival. It was a story of love, sacrifice, and the power of hope. Life at Harry's mansion slowly returned to a peaceful rhythm. Clara had fully recovered, and Emily's health flourished more with each passing day. The once quiet house was now filled with laughter and warmth, a testament to the healing power of love and resilience. As weeks turned into months, Clara and Harry grew closer. They found solace in each other's company, sharing their fears, hopes, and dreams. What began as gratitude and respect soon blossomed into something deeper, a connection built on trust and shared purpose. A year after the surgery, Harry surprised Clara with a heartfelt gesture. It was a crisp spring evening, and the garden was alight with soft fairy lights. Harry invited Clara and Emily for what seemed like a simple dinner, but as dessert was served, he rose from his chair, his hands trembling slightly. "Clara," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion swirling within him. "You walked into our lives at a time when hope seemed out of reach. You didn't just save Emily. You saved me. You've brought love and light back into this home, and I can't imagine a future without you in it." Clara's breath caught in her throat as Harry knelt, revealing a delicate ring in a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his eyes filled with both vulnerability and certainty. Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. Emily clapped her hands excitedly, running over to hug them both. "Does this mean we're a real family now?" she asked, her eyes wide with happiness. Clara smiled, pulling Emily into her arms. "We've always been a family," she said, her heart full. A year later, Clara and Harry welcomed a new addition to their family, a baby boy with bright, curious eyes they named Ethan. Emily adored her little brother, doting on him at every opportunity. For Clara, Ethan symbolized a new beginning, a ray of light breaking through the shadows of her past. For Harry, he was a reminder of the love and strength that had brought their family together. And for Emily, he was a gift, a little brother who filled their home with laughter and boundless joy. Together, Clara, Harry, Emily, and Ethan built a life rooted in love and shared purpose. To honor their journey, Harry and Clara founded the Hope and Healing Center, a facility dedicated to providing medical support and emotional care for families in crisis. Clara poured her heart into the center, ensuring that no family would ever feel as lost or hopeless as she once had. The story ended not with a single act of heroism, but with a legacy of compassion. As Clara stood with Harry and their children at the grand opening of the center, she realized how far they had come. What began as a chance encounter on a stormy night had transformed into a journey of healing, hope, and the creation of a family bound not just by blood, but by love. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. Clara and Harry's story is a powerful reminder of the strength found in love, hope, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today. For more stories like this, tales of resilience, kindness, and extraordinary ways people can change each other's lives, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss another story that could brighten your day. Let's continue to celebrate the beauty of humanity and the strength of the human spirit, one story at a time. Thank you for being part of our community, and we'll see you in the next video.